What if I told you the first gun wasn't created to conquer nations, but to solve a problem traditional weapons could no longer handle? This is not just the story of a weapon. It's the story of how fire became portable, and how that single change reshaped history. For centuries, war followed familiar rules. Armored knights dominated the battlefield. Steel, strength, and years of training decided who lived and who died. Power belonged to those who could afford armor, horses, and professional soldiers. But by the early 1400s, those rules were starting to fail. Armies were growing larger, battles were becoming more chaotic, and commanders faced a simple question: how do you stop heavy armor without matching its strength or its cost? That question didn't start in Europe. Long before the first gunshot in a European war, fire had already been studied, experimented with, and misunderstood. Gunpowder was first created in China, more than 1,000 years earlier. Chinese alchemists were not trying to invent weapons. They were searching for immortality. They mixed saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal, hoping to create a substance that could preserve life. Instead, they created something that burned violently. At first, this mixture was not feared. It was used in rituals, fireworks, signals, and celebrations. Only later did people realize that controlled fire could move objects with force. That knowledge traveled slowly west, through trade routes, wars, and cultural exchange. The Islamic world played a crucial role. Muslim scholars were not focused on weapons either. They studied chemistry, medicine, and materials. They refined gunpowder formulas, improved purification methods, and documented reactions. Gunpowder became more stable, more predictable, and more powerful. Eventually, this knowledge reached Europe. Europe did not immediately understand what it had. Gunpowder was expensive, unreliable, and dangerous. At first, Europe used it only in cannons, large metal tubes, fixed in place, slow to reload, powerful, but limited. And then someone asked a dangerous question. If fire can throw stone from a cannon, can it throw metal from something small enough to carry? The first handgun was born in workshops, not laboratories. Blacksmiths took iron bars, heated them, hammered them, and wrapped metal around rods to form short, thick tubes. The metal had to be heavy. Thin iron could explode. One end was sealed, the other left open. A small hole was drilled near the back. That hole controlled everything. There was no trigger, no grip, no safety. To fire the weapon, gunpowder was poured into the barrel. A lead ball, or metal fragments, were dropped on top, and a burning match was brought to the ignition hole. If the powder was weak, nothing happened. If the timing was wrong, nothing happened. If the metal failed, the weapon could explode in the user's hands. The effective range was short, often less than 20 meters. Accuracy was poor, sometimes non-existent. But at close range, the force was undeniable. The lead ball relied on mass, not speed. Armor could crack, bones could break, and even when it didn't kill, it terrified. That fear was tested for the first time in a real war. Around 1420, during the Hussite Wars in Central Europe, In the region of Bohemia, local forces faced armored knights of the Holy Roman Empire. On paper, they had no chance. So they used what they had: handheld firearms. When the knights advanced, they expected arrows. They expected steel. Instead, they heard explosions, a sound they had never heard before. Thick smoke filled the battlefield. Visibility disappeared. Horses panicked. Formations broke. Some knights fell. Others stopped advancing. Confused. Uncertain. Afraid. Armor didn't fail. Confidence did. Victory did not come from accuracy. It came from shock. News of that moment spread fast. Knights hated the weapon. They called it dishonorable, unfair, a tool that erased years of training. Some commanders tried to ban it. Others copied it. As early as 1405, German military engineer Konrad Kaiser had already documented these weapons. In his book Bellifortis, he illustrated handheld firearms and explained how they worked. After the Hussite Wars, there was no going back. German workshops copied the design. Italian craftsmen refined it. Powder mixtures improved. Barrels became stronger. The next step was control. Holding a burning match by hand was dangerous. So craftsmen mounted it. This created the matchlock, a simple arm that lowered the flame. With a controlled motion, accidents decreased. Reliability improved. Training became possible. Barrel quality improved. Powder measurements became more consistent. Lead balls became standardized. Slowly, the handgun stopped being an experiment. By the late 1400s, handguns were no longer rare. They appeared with soldiers, guards, and travelers. Not because they were perfect, but because they worked. Armor lost its dominance. Skill lost exclusivity. Power became portable. What began as an accidental discovery in China, refined through the Islamic world, and proven on European battlefields, became the most personal weapon humanity had ever known. The first handgun was crude, unstable, dangerous, but it crossed a line. Once fire could be controlled, aimed, and carried in one hand, war changed. Society changed. And the balance of power shifted forever. This was only the beginning. If this story resonates, this could become the first episode of a new series called History of Weapons. Because the handgun was not the end. It was the first step. So now, here's the question. Do you think firearms were an inevitable evolution of warfare? Or a mistake humanity can never undo?